Hey guys, welcome to the Performance Playbook podcast. Today we've got the one and only Jacko. Jacko, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm good. How is everyone doing?
Good.
I hope you're well yourself.
Yes, sir, I am. This podcast for me, just to start this off, was super exciting. Specifically, once I found your content, I've been kind of looking for a coach that's been putting out this information for a bit. And running into your information was exciting for me. Walking back, we just lightly talked about it. But when I first was at my first Olympic Games, I brought two books with me. I brought James Nestor's book, and then I brought Wim Hof's book. At that point, I was like really obsessed with breathing.
Yeah,
and
nice.
I never knew how important it was. And so, while I'm at the games, I'm running through these books because they're so intricate and they're so interesting to see that something so simple that we all do thousands of times a day can impact your life so in-depthly. Have you read those books, or have either one of those authors, James Nestor or Wim Hof, kind of affected you in your work?
Yeah, for sure. Both of them, and then to throw the third one into the mix, Patrick McKeown's work with the Oxygen Advantage. Patrick McKeown is who taught me. And was my teacher, and I'm one of the master instructors with the Oxygen Advantage now. So I work with him. I teach the certification. I run the mentorship program, so I like working, mentoring other breath coaches. All three of those for sure have played a big role. Probably Wim's work more so for the cold therapy or the cold water exposure that I enjoy and practice that. I don't tend to practice the hyperventilation work that he does. My work is more based on functional breathing and breathing for sports performance recovery for nervous system. We can dive into all those sorts of things. Yeah,
gladly. Well, so the one thing that I kind of wanted to touch first before we even get into the breathing was, is there something specific that you do, or there's specific workouts external to the breathing mechanics and the methods that actually aid into your practice? Is there specific workouts, maybe even eating that you try to lead your way in that kind of benefits all of that?
Yeah, I mean, like as you said around breathing and coming across, when you come across like James Nestor's work and saying we're breathing potentially 20,000 or plus times a day, depending on how efficient you're being with your breathing. Like the less efficient, less good we are at breathing, the more we're gonna do it. But whatever you're doing, training wise, whether you're training, whether you're warming up for training, whether you're thinking about planning your session for your training, whatever it is that you're doing, whether you're eating, we're always breathing. And so there's always something that we can look at doing without being obsessive about it. But there is always a way to breathe, to optimize. This is the way I look at it: to optimize the thing I'm going to go and do, or create a specific stimulus that I'm looking for getting out of this particular training session. So a classic example for that might be like integrating, and this is a big thing for me when I'm working with the professional athletes I work with, is that integration of the breath training into their training regimes as much as is logistically possible, rather than having to be something extra we're always doing. But an example for that could be like, I'm doing a session that is supposed to be anaerobic in nature. I can integrate some breath holding into that session, potentially, depending on what the purpose of the session is, but potentially because it's going to give me a stronger dose of that anaerobic stimulus that I'm trying to get an adaptation from. And then we call that like hypoxic, hypercapnic training, but basically affecting my blood gas levels from my breathing, as well as affecting things like lactate from the intensity of the session. So it's another tool that allows us to get more out of training that we're doing, or enhance how we're recovering. And when we understand the beautiful simplicity of it, combined with the nuances and the complexity that we can, really double down on in certain areas, it's something that for me as a strength and conditioning coach it's actually the only thing I really coach now, because I see it as like paramount and foundational to like whatever it is you're going to go and do. Your sport with diving, it's like a great example of like coordination, like the physical attributes, the flexibility attributes, the being able to stay calm under pressure and like keep the nervous system calm, like those things, all of which, you know, I'm scared of heights, so I'd be terrible at any type of diving. But
we all are.
But with all of that wrapped around all of that, to a degree, it's a little bit, don't get offended, but like it's a little bit like golf or a sport like that where you get to go when you join. In golf, you choose when to hit the ball. Everything else is still like, I know you can't take all day, but essentially you get to choose when you make that dive. Whereas a sport I played like rugby, it was reactional. Like apart from place kicking, you know, most of the skill you're trying to perform is reacting to what's happening in the game. And that in a way, often if we can get into some sort of flow state, is easier. But when you're there, I imagine on the edge of the board, do I go now or do I wait a second? All of that provides a load of headspace that makes it more complicated. And people that haven't performed professional sport may or may not be able to appreciate what that's like. Because most of the time, people, I'm sure you get this as well. I used to play professional rugby, and you know, it's amazing to play a sport for our career, right? I didn't get to go to the dizzy heights of the Olympics like yourself, but like it's a privilege, and I would have friends sometimes be like, oh man, blah, you know, really pumped for you, which is great. But there were also times where it's not great, when things aren't going well, when you're injured, when the coach doesn't like you no more, so you got a new coach, and or you're out of favour and you don't get in the team, or you know, all these other things that go around it. With rugby, it was funny. Like, even just say it's Tuesday, it's 9:00, and it's pissing it down with rain outside, and there's like 15 massive blokes that just want to beat me up today, and that's apparently going to work. At that point, you're like, I'd happily stack shelves in the supermarket, jokingly, but like, you know, even just little things like that. But there's different pressures, right, that come with it. You're constantly being judged, and that brings a psychological challenge and stress to us. And I think one of the things that I love about breathing that helps people in sport, but outside of sport as well, is how, when we understand the relationship between breathing and our nervous system, it allows us to build like stress resilience to stress, as well as be able to cope better with physical or psychological, emotional stresses. And that's massively important for athletes, but it's important for everybody in life. And also remembering that as athletes, we're also people in life. We're not just athletes. So it covers everything.
I think you touch a couple of really interesting points there, specifically the ones that I have felt myself. I had a coach once watch me literally just walk up the platform, and I wasn't walking, I was running. And he could tell that I'm running up to 10 meter, but my whole nervous system, even just like my aura is just like, it's too much. And then I get to the 10 meter and I don't do exactly what I want to do, like golf, right? Because it's such you just got to swing and hit the ball. Does it have to be that hard? But you know, but it's hard as shit. That's why there's professionals and they make a lot of money. It's an incredible sport. But I noticed that when I'm practicing and I'm sprinting up the platform, I'm mouth breathing, and then I can feel my heart going way more than I want. And so when he told me, hey, just walk up. You don't have to run up the platform. Just walk up. I would notice that I would nasal breathe instead. And then obviously it's like with the water dripping down, you have to make sure you're like not just soaking in all the chlorinated water, but
it's not good for you breathing.
But like slowing down and being able to walk, breathe through the nose, I would notice that I would be a lot more confident and calm walking up to do what I needed to do.
Yeah. You're affecting your brain and your nervous system. Yeah, you're affecting. And the obvious one for people, if they don't want to get too scientific, is just very simply the notice an increase in heart rate, that is your heart is part of the nervous system. That is part of that response. And the fact that you noticing like mouth breathing, again, it's part of that stress response. Like people have heard of like fight or flight. Everything, physical, like changing, running rather than walking is going to affect that. But just we know how we think affects our nervous system because my mum last couple of days, she had really high blood pressure, and she's been worried about it. And then every time she has a blood pressure taken, she's worried about it being high, and that then makes her anxious. And then it's like off the charts. And nothing is stressful happening, but there's a thought in that, and we've all been through that where you're thinking about something, and it's making you nervous, and it's making you feel anxious, or whatever those sensations are. And they're real sensations, and there's real physiological changes that go alongside that. And I guess the most obvious one that we can notice is things like heart rate, but then also how your breathing changes, breathing rate, breathing dynamics. Classic one is like the speed or respiratory rate, speed of breathing increases. That's linked with stress. But the beautiful thing is, and the empowering thing about it with the breathing is just simply bringing your awareness to it helps to change it. And you notice that where you just described there. It doesn't have to be complicated. We can talk about some complicated things, and we can make it all very scientific by talking about the biochemistry of everything, the biomechanics of everything that's going on. But what I love about what I coach is ultimately what it comes down to working with giving out advice and coach for athletes is it's pretty simple stuff, but it has, because it's going to on one level impact the nervous system, bits of it are instant. You can make a change immediately. And that's exciting.
Yeah. It's like, again, like walking to the edge of the board, I was able to notice, again, if you're looking at like the strength and conditioning side, I felt like my force output to jump, to explode, to react was a hell of a lot more efficient. And it just felt easier if I was able to actually bring down the heart rate and make sure, hey, I'm calm enough to do what I need instead of kind of being wired and panicky.
It's that arousal curve.
So,
yeah. That bell shape, the inverted U, like bell shape arousal curve. If you're over aroused, when you talk about power, like being over aroused is going to be detrimental performance. And there's that sweet spot in the middle, so we don't want to like sort of calm too much. But the relaxed muscles produce more power. And when you're overly aroused, you create too much muscle tone, and we need power comes from like relaxation to contraction, quick, short fire. And the excess tension you'll create when we're stressed is going to inhibit our ability to do the things we've probably done quite well in training when we're doing our power development. Your plyometrics and your box jumps, and you might do some weighted, whatever the things are that you're doing in training. When you're not feeling stressed, you get things firing well. Yeah. But when it comes to competition,
So the sad, I'm going to say the sad part for me, knowing and recognizing, for example, like the mouth breathing and stuff like that, is when I was younger, before, I'm just going to say pre and post reading these books, because the books finally gave me the information to, oh shit, like I suck at this and this isn't great. And this is actually really important for you. But I used to actively breathe through my mouth, and my mouth was always dry. And it almost like, I don't know if it was like a competition with myself, but it was just kind of like fun to get my mouth dry, and I would consistently breathe through my mouth. Yeah, it was just like weird, childish things that I would do for the hell of it. But, from reading that book, I was able to start to implement some of these trainings, especially just like James Nestor, when you read about how detrimental not breathing through your nose is at night, and how that just so quickly snowballs your health.
Oh gosh, I know.
It's crazy. It's actually like frightening. And so, every person that I'm running into is, hey, like and I've heard some of your information. Are you really tired this morning? What, is your mouth dry? Like, can we, there's some steps that we can take. So is that one of the first things that you have with your athletes, is that kind of like that baseline checker? Are you sleeping correctly?
Great. I mean, definitely sleep is one question. And there's a number, breathing isn't the only thing that influences sleep. Like, there's a number of things that go into influencing in sleep, screen time, and how how you're breathing during the day and how bad training or how stressed the system is, and all sorts of stuff that's potentially going on. But it's definitely part of the question, I guess. One of the first things that we'll check on we'll check on history, so injury history and history potentially of concussions, because that can play a role in the respiratory centers in the brainstem, and then get an idea of what their breathing is like in the various different dimensions. So what are their mechanics like? What's their CO2 tolerance or sensitivity like? And also their like psychological relationship with the feeling of air hunger. All those things build up a picture of like, okay, how well is this person breathing? And then if we're doing it in person as well, I've got a device for measuring HRV, so heart rate variability, which tells us a bit more about the nervous system, but breathing and the nervous system sort of go hand in hand, and it's a two-way street. So I'm trying to build up a picture of like, what's this person's breathing like, what's this person's nervous system like, because they're the two key areas that I'm going to be able to help with. Now, if I get someone whose breathing needs a lot of work and their nervous system's quite upregulated, I can ask the sleep question, but I know what the answer is going to be. Or what can often happen is people have no idea what good sleep is supposed to be. Ask most people, and if most people listening to this podcast now, if you ask yourself or hear me go, how's your sleep? Most people go, yeah, it's all right. And it's like, based on what? Like, what parameters are we putting? Like, rate it out of 10. Yeah, I'm 7, 8. I don't know. Like, it's, and then, but you have to ask a bit more specific questions, like do you wake up and drive? How do you actually feel in the morning? Do you like jump out of bed and you like feel refreshed, or do you find it hard to get out of bed in the morning? Do you get up in the night like, oh no, yeah, I find it difficult to fall asleep, but when I'm asleep, I stay asleep, or I fall asleep straight away, but then I wake up a few times during the night. That's normal, isn't it? And it's like, well, we want to feel restored from a good night's sleep, and we really should be sleeping all the way through, and we shouldn't be waking up to want to have a drink because our mouth is dry because we become dehydrated. And that's what, mouth breathing at night has been shown. It's quite a specific number, like from one study, like 42%, a significant number, amount of moisture lost, mouth breathing compared to nasal breathing. And it's just one of the angles where you look at the functional anatomy of the nose, what it's got designed in the nose and within the airway, and the role that plays in breathing, and compare that with the mouth. The mouth is just not designed for breathing, other than the escape route when we need a larger vessel and we need to get more air in. But partly it's around, I find this thing, a question that a lot of people ask is like, if it's natural for me to go to mouth breathing, and particularly like panting, like, if you're doing a really hard training session or something, if that's so bad for me, and if that's not what I'm supposed to do, Jacko, why is that what my body goes to naturally? And I'm like, because your body doesn't want you to train. What does your body want you to do? It wants to keep homeostasis. So when you start training hard, your body is trying to breathe in a way that will get you to stop. And what happens when you're panting like that? You stop, and the body wins. So we have to do something that is not intuitive or not natural if we're going to try to maximize a physical performance that ultimately the body doesn't want you to do. That's, there's no different. That's where my background in as a strength training, like, your body doesn't want you to go and do 100 kilo back squat. When you do some and then come back the next week, you feel better because your body is trying to, is adapting to the stress you placed upon it. And so long as you give yourself time to do it, it's going to feel easier to do it because your body doesn't want you to stress it again. It doesn't want to be in the gym. And I think that we confuse often what, like, exercise makes me feel good. We're not denying that. We know it does. And we know how good exercise is for us and for our physical and mental health. But it isn't, it doesn't want to be stressed physically or whatever. Yeah. But it's got ways that when it comes, it can adapt. And that for me makes a lot of sense of like, oh yeah, actually, yeah, when you're absolutely blowing out of your ass, you breathe like that, not because it's good. You don't feel good. You don't recover quicker. It's because it's getting you to stop. Yeah. So if you don't want to stop, well, then let's talk about and think about what do we know about how breathing affects our physiology for oxygen delivery, managing CO2 and the effect that that has, to then breathe in a way that isn't that mouth panting breathing, that then allows me to recover faster so I can go again. But your body, naturally, your body doesn't want you to recover faster to go again because it wants you to stop, and anyone, I've took part in some like ultra running events where you go far beyond the physical capabilities of your body for the duration of the thing that you're doing, and you get to see all of that playing out in real life, and it's phenomenal where your mind goes, and it's phenomenal when you carry on going what the body ends up managing to do. It's absolutely crazy, but there's always payback that the body asks for back. So just after at the end, like if you do something, you do a 3-day ultra, like, and you might feel the best at the end. Like I felt the best out of all 3 days at the end of day 3. Makes no sense. I was absolutely parked. And day 4, as in when the thing is finished, I'm like a mess, and like the body will let you go somewhere, but it's like, okay, but we need that back now. Like you need to respect the recovery. And that's one of the things that we get right. Again, another thing that we get wrong. We don't have, and this is what I do. A lot of work that I do with breathing is like the effect that it can have on recovery. And I'm not talking about like your Normatec or your Compex or your ice bath. I'm talking about affecting your nervous system recovery. Breathing can do that. We're very good in sports at creating physically demanding and emotionally and psychologically demanding training sessions to provide a stimulus. But if we don't give ourselves the recovery and the tools and the ability to up our recovery, we're just taxing ourselves more. And we need to respect the work that we do with the recovery.
Yeah. So you touched a lot of topics that I want to go back.
Yeah, sorry, I've gone all over the place. This is me.
No, you're good. You're good.
There's a lot to talk about.
But so we talked about breathing for sleep, and I do want to come back to that. But you brought up a point that I find super, super interesting because I saw one of your posts kind of talk about it, and then you just brought it up. But when it comes to, let's say, a concussion or trying to recover from that, I've never heard of breathing being something that would aid in that recovery. Before that though, is there, because again, you have a lot of sports that are having micro trauma to the head. Does that play into the breathing and how that affects your sleep and so on and so forth?
It's probably so. Two of the biggest things: breathing and the nervous system, and those two things go hand in hand. Like as you breathe, like literally every breath you take, as you breathe in on the inhale, your heart rate speeds up and it's more sympathetic activating of the nervous system. The exhale we take, heart rate slows down, it's more parasympathetic promoting. Your breathing and your nervous system are constantly communicating backwards and forwards to each other. So they're the two main things. When we have a big head trauma, we know that the respiratory centers are affected. That's been well documented in over research that dates back to like the 1960s. Since being able to make measures of the nervous system with things like heart rate variability over the last sort of 10, 20 years, we're starting to see the effect that head traumas have on the nervous system. The more micro, like the smaller knocks, and they can even be not even a knock to the head, like just a knock to the body that jolts the head, can affect things. Whether I haven't personally seen research recently that like, is that a direct breathing effect from like disrupting the respiratory centers as opposed to sort of creating more stress within the nervous system. But the two will play into each other anyway. So it's almost like it's likely to have an effect. How the bigger the key things are, like the bigger the impact, obviously the more likely there is to have a bigger effect. But things that that are really important is like, how close was the previous like impact in terms of time frame? Has my brain and nervous system recovered from my previous head trauma? That's that's one of the key things to know and understand. And I've got a whole free seminar that I did that's on my site, probreathwork.com, that goes into the detail of that and how to assess your breathing, how to check whether like your breathing and your nervous system are recovered, and what breathing exercise you can do to help. So if people, if people are in that type of space and they've had a few concussions from whatever sport they play or in life they've had them, like, you need to listen to more than just a 2-minute part of a podcast to try and understand that. But that's all there for free on my website.
Yeah, we'll send them that way. It just, again, I start to think about what I know the best, which is the diving realm. And I had an old teammate, actually was in engineering, put on a little sensor that tracked the impact to your head while diving off 10 meter, because that's 33 feet up. That's pretty high. And even when you hit the water properly, what was shown was like, hey, you do this for long enough, it's going to affect you. And so
do you know what some of those forces? Do you know what some of the forces were? Out of interest.
No, I do not.
Okay.
I can ask and see if they still have the data.
That'd be really interesting.
To actually,
it'd be really interesting.
That. But when you look at the macro trauma of like getting concussed, which happens if you miss your hands and just get slapped straight on the head, which I've seen plenty of times. It's happened to me once.
Or even sometimes I watch on telly, like, you guys and girls, you're like millimeters away from if you do a spin, you're like, people must hit their head when they get that wrong. I mean, that is close. And that's not going to be good.
I've landed back on the platform and kneed myself in the face because that was bad technique. I just started diving. So those situations happen. And so you're looking at that macro trauma, you get a concussion. What would be just some intro steps for the breathing side of things to start to work on that? If we can just dive into that.
So it'd be the case of I think when someone's had a physical stress to the brain or psychological stress from life or similar type of thing from like long COVID or illnesses and things. The more the system has been stressed and challenged, like the more the breathing will be more obvious to see that it needs some work, and the nervous system a reflection of or breathing a reflection of that nervous system. So this works across the board. It doesn't have to be for someone having done maybe had a concussion or serious concussions. There's two like very simple things that you can do. One is just literally both of them are like trying to get an idea of the auto nature of your breathing. So there's respiratory centers in your brainstem, that's right in the middle of the brain, that respond, that control your breathing. They control the speed, the rate of your breathing, your respiratory rate, and the size and depth of the breath, or size, the volume of the breath you take in the medulla in the pons. Now, we want to try to get a gauge of like, not when you're consciously controlling your breathing, what's your breathing like? We want to get a gauge of what's the background track, what's the auto, what are those receptors like? So for this, you have to try to not put any effort into any of these sort of check-ins or assessments with the breathing. The simplest is to literally just sit, relaxed, and count your breathing for 30 seconds and find out how many breaths are you taking in 30 seconds. Multiply that by 2 to get your respiratory rate for a minute. We want people to be around about 10 if they're nice and calm. It's not uncommon at all for people to be 16, 18, 20. I had someone the other day like 32 breaths per minute. And you say to them, and this is the way it's the silent killer, it's like, how do you feel? They're like, fine. And you're like, I didn't say that. In my head, I'm going like, you're not fine. Your nervous system is literally screaming at you saying like, can we calm down? Like, this is not good. And that's the nervous system talking through the breathing, but we're just not listening to it. Yeah. And we laugh and it's serious. Like it's not, like me, it's serious, but, so that's a very simple one. Okay. It can be nice during that one to maybe use our hands or get a sensation of like how much of your chest, how much are we breathing through that sort of like chest thoracic position and the direction of it compared to breathing from the lower portion of the ribcage and the diaphragm? Is it vertical or is it coming out? Is it coming from that diaphragm area, which is below the ribcage, or attached onto the bottom of the bottom ribs? It's not necessarily like, we can get into belly breathing maybe later if you want to, but like your lungs aren't in your belly, and like your belly button isn't, you will feel movement down there because the diaphragm's moving those internal organs, but that isn't your diaphragm, and your lungs are in your ribs. So getting a bit of an idea of like the mechanics of how you're breathing, the size of it, where it's coming from, and the direction of the movement. Then the other one is a measure of how sensitive your respiratory centers in the brainstem are to the buildup of carbon dioxide as one of our main respiratory drivers, or driving of our respiratory dynamics. So the more sensitive I am to carbon dioxide that builds up within the body, just because of cellular respiration, that you have to breathe out, it's not a waste gas that we need to breathe, it needs to be in a rush to breathe out. It plays some really vital roles for the nervous system, like for the vagus nerve. It helps, it's vasodilated, so it helps blood vessels open up and improve circulation. And it's the catalyst allows oxygen to be released from red blood cells. So this carbon dioxide that you do, yes, have to breathe out, is really, really important for the body. And we don't want to be too sensitive to it. When we are become too sensitive to it because of stress, because of bad breathing, because of head trauma, or whatever the thing may be, then we'll breathe at a faster rate and potentially in a larger volume of air. It means we're getting rid of more oxygen. The way to just very simply test it is get a stopwatch on your phone. You take a normal breath in and a normal breath out. Then you hold your breath and pause until you get the first definite desire to breathe in. And then when you feel that desire to breathe in, you let go. You don't use any willpower to fight it. It's not like a max breath hold. It's until the first natural sensation to breathe. You let go. You just finished an exhale. So the next part of your breathing cycle is an inhale. You breathe in. And you shouldn't feel out of breath. Your breathing should feel relatively normal. Because remember, we're just looking for auto and these two things. So you're basically timing the duration after a normal breathing cycle is finished, after a normal exhale is finished, how long in seconds until your brain sends a message down your phrenic nerve to say, breathe in now. You just breathe in, and breathing should be relatively normal. If that's less than 10 seconds, that puts us in a category, I was like 8 seconds when I started after my brain injury. It puts us in a category of like, this really needs some work, and you're going to feel a hell of a lot better when you sort this out. And we really want it the right side of 25 seconds. But don't be alarmed for people. It's very normal for that to be 12, 14, 15 seconds when people start. And that can be very fit individuals. Like I work with professional international athletes, and they might start at 14 seconds, yet their physical peak is here, but their respiratory dynamics, their carbon dioxide tolerance, the quality of their breathing mechanics, the strength of their breathing muscles, these are all things that have never been trained unless you train them. You cannot train your CO2 sensitivity and tolerance if you're not training it. Like training hard and getting cardiovascularly fitter is regardless of your CO2 sensitivity, because all that happens when you start exercising, and the harder you exercise, what happens? You just breathe more. And your breathing will always match because you've got that auto part to it. It will always match and keep things the same. So it's often an area for people where, yes, it can massively help with recovery from all sorts of different stresses, but it's also a massive area for athletes that have never looked at it before. The same way, if someone had never looked at nutrition and just ate terribly, they would see some massive improvements by seeing a nutritionist and eating the right things. Same thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And then again, that utilizing that information to actually start to benefit and help that recovery is something I've never heard about. And I think that's again, I like to go less is more. So if we can just bring things back to the body first, and how can I start to, address this issue? That's the best way to go. The other thing you brought up that I found super interesting, was the ultra marathons. But that interlinks with what you just said is training it. So when you're more in like a not anaerobic but like aerobic type of training, right? Long distance training. Again, this is where I start to connect. I'm going to connect James Nestor a lot because I just got so much from that book. But they went on runs and they, purposely taped their mouth and tried to slow down their breathing. And he said at one point he felt like he was going to pass out. Is that one of the types of ways that you can start to train it? Is that too extreme? What are the best ways that we can try to build that muscle?
Yeah. So if we're talking about building respiratory muscle strength, so like particularly the internal, external intercostals and the diaphragm, then we need to provide resistance. Same way, if you want to get strong in the gym, you have to lift a heavier weight than is comfortable, because you have to provide resistance to get that adaptation in terms of strength. Mouth breathing provides very little resistance to our breathing. So nose breathing provides about 50% more. But, if you really want to get serious about training respiratory muscle strength, we need to provide more than even just the nose. But that would be a starting point. People going out, doing something low level aerobic with your mouth closed and breathe through the nose. And everyone's starting point is different. Everyone's got a different nose, how much space you've got back there, the airway, how clear it feels, like the structure of your face and your jaw, and all that plays into it. And then how sensitive you are to the buildup of carbon dioxide will dictate partly also how comfortable you find nasal breathing whilst exercising. I've had an Ironman athlete. She, after the first session that we did together, she went and did like a 5K run nasal breathing and just absolutely smashed it, and was running, and I think she did 10K, was running silly times, like fast 10Ks. And she was like, oh, it felt way better nasal breathing. And I was like, okay, that's not normal. But that's like one extreme. The other extreme is I tried to, same thing as you. I read some of these books and I was like, right, I'm going out for a run. I'm going to nasal breathe. I've never taped my mouth whilst exercising because I just think that's a bit, I don't think James Nestor's at all silly, but I just think the concept of taping my mouth when I'm exercising is a bit silly for a couple of reasons. One, what if I want to talk or need to talk? And two, what if I need a drink? Like, so for me, I choose to close the mouth. And with my athletes, I say, let's choose to close your mouth. At night time is a bit different because you're not as consciously aware of what you're doing when you're asleep. So I would mouth tape at night. But during exercise, just for those reasons of like being able to talk and being able to drink, I think is important. And just choosing to close the mouth. But I got 50 meters, maybe not even that, down my road. And I had like snot pouring down into my mouth. And I was like, I cannot do this. And it was the one time, normally, if I'm not good at something, I'll just go, I'm not going to do that then. I'm just going to ignore it. But, for me, my journey into breathing started with a brain injury that ended my professional rugby career 10 years ago. And I was looking at things that I could do to improve my brain's health, because I'm in a category of people that are, susceptible to early onset of dementia and other, brain and memory cognitive issues, because of the sheer number of concussions that I've had and the severity of some of the main traumatic brain injuries I had, particularly the last one where I had a bleed on the brain. So brain health is important to me. And I was like, okay, I've read all the stuff that says I need to be able to use my nose. That's important for my health and my brain's health. So I stuck with it, and I was like, right, okay, I'll go as slow as I need to go. But my run now is being dictated by my nose, not my ego. And that was probably one of the best decisions I've made in my life.
Yeah.
I was at the back
of
beautiful. Anyone else running. It was slow at the start, but it was necessary.
Yeah. I even tested that myself a few months ago when I was on a break from diving. I got a little jacked up. I watched David Goggins. I was like, let me go on a run.
Nice.
Because I've really never gone on a run before. It's just not what my sport is. My sport is just quick power movements. And I did want to focus on the nasal breathing, but I almost found like a rhythm. It was like, ba, 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 breathe, ba, 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 breathe. And I just tried to find that rhythm so I wasn't overexerting. Yeah. And just going way too much, like way too far. And then if I did feel the heart rate going up too much, I just started to walk. But I did try to fight that urge to breathe through my mouth. Do you find that most of the time when we're training, even if it's in an anaerobic setting, we actually don't need to breathe through our mouth? Like, is there times to where it's like, sure, like max effort, go ahead, breathe through the mouth? When is it kind of like valid for you?
For me, it's always everything depends. Nothing in isolation. So it depends on the context of the sport, depends on the context of the individual, depends on where they're at in their current like training with me and their progression with me, and it depends on their sport and what we're trying to achieve from this session. So that could mean keep your mouth closed, only nasal breathe. But it could also mean use your mouth. But one thing that's big for me is like use your mouth effectively. Don't let your mechanics go out of the window and start panting. Because I've taught you and I've educated you, if you work with me, that's the worst type of breathing. That's like go home breathing. That's like the body going stop. Like we're going to get control, keep good mechanics, control the rate of our breathing, and a big one, get control of our exhalation, because that helps us. And then ultimately like gradually get ourselves back to nasal breathing. But it could go as the most sort of extreme of the mouth breathing is like dumping CO2 when it's built up. Like a strong, forceful, purposeful use of the mouth for that emergency exit that it's there designed to do, to get rid of excess CO2 that's built up so that I can then regulate much more quickly. But if I always use that, and you'll feel like you recover your breathing really quick, that's just using our understanding of like the physiology of how CO2 is our driver, but like to our advantage. But if you always do that in training, you're actually not building up your tolerance of CO2. So the vast majority of the time, we are trying to look at, that integration I mentioned before, integration into the training. Like, where in training can you nasal breathe? And it's not just nasal breathing. Like that gets like it's about breathing well. And that involves nasal breathing, but that involves the rib cage, the alignment of the rib cage, the expansion of the rib cage, the function and movement of the diaphragm, the strength of the diaphragm, the internal, external intercostals. It's easy to say, like, I've got a pair of, I'd do quite well if I could. I've got a pair of budgie smugglers, like a little pair of Speedos that my sister got me for my 40th birthday. She got them made up for me from Budgie Smuggler. They'd like print your own thing. And on the back, on the arse, it says, keep it nasal. And I always joke that I was just like, it only says that because my arse isn't big enough to have keep it nasal unless these conditions, and there's a whole series of things as to why someone may not. If we're not, one thing I will say though is if we're not a professional athlete and you're doing all of your exercise for health and enjoyment of them, I would question whether you need to work at a rate that your nose can't handle. And actually, if you're someone like I'm N is 1, but I'm proof of someone that couldn't run 50 meters nasal breathing, chose to let the nose dictate the pace and slowed it right down, and have gradually built back up. And I'll do anything now and stay nasal breathing to the extreme of like, I'll do like 30-second intervals with breath holds using the sports mask on my assault bike, and I'll still nasal breathe in between because it actually now feel I now feel worse mouth breathing. And I know for most people, they'll be like, what? Like, and it didn't feel like that at the start, but, I've probably invested 4 years or so getting to that point. Does everyone want to invest that? No. But does everyone need to work at an intensity that their nose can't handle? If you're just doing it for health reasons, maybe not. If you're a professional athlete, well, then we need to, that's then a conversation around like, which parts can you do nasal breathing, which parts can't? How much are we going to try and get you to be able to do? And it's then using the right tool for the right situation. A lot of the sports I play, a lot of the sports I coach within, like particularly a sport like rugby, football, or soccer for the Americans. There's large parts of the game where we can nasal breathe, and there's large parts of the game in a sport like rugby union where we're not going to be nasal breathing. But can we breathe well? can we use what we understand about breathing to help regulate our breathing and our nervous system in recovery periods, so that you're able to perform higher backs of work when it does. And when you use the mouth, like, use it well. Still work with good breathing mechanics, that rib cage, that diaphragm.
You talked about adding resistance. So breathing through the nose would be one example of resistance. It sounds like we can utilize a mask while doing higher intensity things. Would jumping in a sauna and just focusing on breathing through your nose, would that be a form of resistance, or would that just be like almost a cardiovascular event and breathing through the nose?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's probably not going to provide more resistance to your breathing muscles. If we went to altitude, when you go to altitude, the air's thinner, and when you the way you breathe, where you get air to come in, is you have to expand your inside to reduce pressure by increasing the volume inside of you, so the rib cage moving. And that reduction in pressure moves from high to low. That's what draws air in. When the air pressure outside is lower, because you're at altitude, you have to work harder to make that pressure differential happen. So that is sort of one thing potentially that's sort of in that realm. But literally, like, you could block one nostril. All of a sudden, you've reduced you've increased your resistance by 50%, because now you're only using one of the holes of your nostril. You can put like a belt or a resistance band or something around the rib cage that will provide resistance to the inhalation, but it's not going to provide the resistance for the exhalation. So the best resistance that you can provide is with the sports mask. It also pulls the CO2 that you're breathing out. Exhaled CO2 is about 100 times greater than atmospheric CO2. So you re-inhale some of that CO2 that you're naturally breathing out, which helps you. It's not very nice, but it helps you work on your CO2 tolerance. But the sauna thing is, the heat of a sauna is a stressor. One of the nice things about, so we've got saunas installed at home, actually. We've sort of gone full hog on the whole thing. And it's like comparing ice bath and sauna, right? You jump in an ice bath and that stress hits you like bang, and your breathing response, it's an immediate stress. Whereas the sauna is a bit of a slow burner and it gets you like later. So you don't feel like your breathing's challenged at all when you first go in the sauna. It's nice to get warm and you warm, but then eventually you get to the point where you're like sweating and you're like, this is flipping hard. But one thing I do like about the sauna, the breathing, is if you breathe in fast through the nose, it feels like it burns your nostrils. So the heat of the sauna encourages you to breathe very slowly. Slower breathing is calmer breathing, calmer for the nervous system. Like, if you can slow your breathing down, you're keeping CO2 in potentially a little bit more, as long as you're controlling the volume of air that you're breathing. So it does encourage you to breathe a bit more efficiently, which is efficiency, like you said before, like about doing less. Breathing efficiently is about doing less. Saves energy.
You look at, again, some of the information that was explained within James Nestor's book about actually working with asthma, and you've brought up the diaphragm so many times, and a lot of the medical practices that he was finding that were kind of stopped for no reason was really making sure that the diaphragm had the mobility to move, and like breathing properly, smartly, intuitively, like utilizing the belly. Does that like kind of spark a big piece within your own training? Is that something you do focus on? Like, hey, we need to see if your diaphragm's moving well, because if we're going for high performance, or even just trying to work with someone that has piss poor breathing and runs into the issue of asthma, that's something you can kind of utilize to fix it or make it better.
Any part of breathing it's all sort of linked in together. So like we've probably talked quite a bit about the biochemistry side of it, that sensitivity CO2, and the biomechanics is another area, but they work together. Like, in order for you to mechanically breathe well, requires that movement and function of the diaphragm, which attaches onto the bottom of that rib cage. And we need the rib cage to articulate out as the diaphragm moves down and flattens out. They need to work in synchronization together. It's one of the reasons why, when I talked about like belly breathing, if I'm pushing my belly out from around my belly button, I can do that with very little movement or zero movement of my rib cage. So I'm not creating the correct articulation of the rib cage to create the right movement or allow for the full movement and function and correct function of the diaphragm. So it's important that the rib cage and the diaphragm working together. Whether that is going to be the first place I'd start with someone with asthma is probably not. But for someone in terms of an athletic population or a sports person, we're definitely looking at the rib cage and the diaphragm. We're looking at how mobile that rib cage is, how much can it articulate out, expand and open up, but also how well can you actually get it down and those ribs down and in on the exhalation. You'd be surprised at how many people cannot exhale well that I see for two reasons. Their ribs won't move, as in they're stuck and they're tight, and that can be alignment and positioning of the rib cage as a starting point, but as well as literally like the ribs won't come down and in. They're stuck in extension, that sort of rib flare type position. And then also that their intercostals are weak and their obliques are weak. They can't actually get the ribs down and in from it. Like the muscles are weak that are actually doing that action. Like exhalation at rest is passive, but during sport it's active. And if you can't get those ribs to move, you'll still breathe and you'll still get the air out, but you'll compensate through the spine. It'll be a more global flexion and extension position. So yeah, one of the things I do, particularly early doors with an athlete, is work on some rib cage mobilizations and using the breath to mobilize the rib cage and teach them about how the alignment of the rib cage and stacking of the rib cage helps with the function of the ribs and the diaphragm itself and how that feels better. But then you go and retest something like thoracic rotation or hamstring length or shoulder internal external rotation. You get someone breathing well, you get those ribs moving, you get that rib cage in a good position. Stuff that's surrounding that, like your scapula sits on the back of the rib cage, like you'll improve shoulder function or range of motion of the shoulder. You'll definitely improve thoracic rotation because the ribs at the back connect into the thoracic spine. And you get someone in one session going like, well, that feels better to breathe. And crikey, now I can actually move more, like, and I can feel that. It helps with the buy-in. Like, it helps with the buy-in as well that, like, breathing, it's not just a 1%er. It's like they leave feeling like, I don't know, whatever the percentage, but it's not a 1%er. It's far more than a 1%er if you've never looked at it.
Yeah, I've tried working on that when I was, again, in that time of reading those books and stuff, trying to fully exhale and really making sure that I'm like getting as much out as possible to feel kind of everything compressing. Yeah. It's way harder than you'd expect.
People can't do it. It's for sure.
It's hard.
We can't, but we've never been taught it. We've never been practiced it. So it's actually not surprising that we can't do something well because we don't get taught it. We don't get coached it. You know, I got no education. Something that I'm trying to do is help with coaching and personal training, sort of education, strength and conditioning education. Like, we should have a module or a section on all these elements of breathing that we're talking about, because they're going to be something that every single one of your client or athletes they're all breathing when you're teaching them something else, and their breathing may well be impairing some of their movement quality, some of their injuries that they're picking up, some of the nervous system dysregulation. And it's for me, like, I'm biased because it's what I teach now. Like, so for me, it's like it's the starting point, but it's the most fundamental and basic movement pattern you're going to do. You know, for most people, it's say that they'd go for something like a squat or a lunge. You know, no, the movement of the rib cage and the diaphragm, that a breath is a movement. You know, there's a contraction, there's an isometric, there's an eccentric, concentric, eccentric. Like there's that whole movement that you could describe as a squat. You could describe the same thing with the breath. And you can do a squat badly, and you wouldn't load a bad squat pattern. You can breathe poorly mechanically, yet we not necessarily load it with jumping. We challenge it through working hard, and we haven't actually taught people, give people the tools to actually manage their breathing whilst they're exercising.
Yeah, I haven't. So I didn't hear it too frequently. I've had 2 mentors in the strength and conditioning field that have lightly brought it up to me, and I heard it, and it kind of just like it hit me and deflected off. I was like, yeah, but like especially when it came to mobility, right? So they said it hit me, and I was like, yeah, but there's no way that me loading this person into a position or making sure that they have the strength to access this range wouldn't be as beneficial as me doing these other things. And then I started to like really look at it after I've loaded this athlete. I've put them into dynamic, passive, isometric positions, but it was very funny to start to hear it more consistently. And then you even bring up being able to move the rib cage properly, and it baffles me. His overhead range of motion is horrible. It's horrible, and I tried everything underneath the sun to try to do it, and then again I hear you bring up the rib cage and breathing, because they all said the same thing. He's too
there's
too
no
tight.
Yeah, and there'll be absolutely no way that he's not compensating through his rib cage and his thoracic if his overhead position's terrible. There's no way. Yeah, and there's a load of things that there's a number of things that can affect the function of like the shoulder and overhead positions. But for sure, like the rib cage is a great place to start, because like it's literally all of you. You find your collarbone. You can do this with me now. Find your collarbone. Yeah? Sticking out your collarbone. Your first rib's higher than that. Find your lowest rib. All the way down on your side. How low it goes down. Like literally right down by your pelvis. Like, you've got one of those bad boys on each side, and they wrap all around you. Goes to your sternum in the middle. Goes all the way to your spine at the back. Chop your arms and legs off. You're literally a flipping rib cage. And you got your pelvis in it. But Johnny, it's just... It's you. It's like it is central to you. Where you put it dictates how it moves and dictates how you move. It feels sort of obvious when you like break it down and look at it, but it's just something that I've worked as a strength and conditioning coach for a number of years, like 5, 6 years, maybe 7 years, without understanding anything about breathing. Because you're just not taught it.
Yeah. And so just like kind of looking at it, I got one drill from one of the mentors to actually have him lay on a ball, kind of where the diaphragm is, to just focus on the breathing. And then the other one just brought up in general, like, hey, throughout the entire day, he's too tense. Like, look at his shoulders, his traps and his neck are like well overdeveloped. And so they're all bringing up this fact, and I've been wanting to kind of run into his training and start to retouch certain things, but it's funny to see how, again, even when it comes to mobility, like your breathing is playing such a massive role in dictating if you can kind of bring your CNS down, so you can actually extend.
I'd love to do
ranges.
There's like the simplest mechanics drill that I do, just to like, it just touches on like the alignment of the rib cage and just getting the 3-dimensional expansion. And it's also like a bit down regulating for the nervous system, the way that we sort of slow down the exhale. I would love to show you that maybe separately, so that you could do it with him, because he won't be doing the arms aren't overhead. It's nothing to do with overhead range. But I guarantee that if you did a test and retest and did like 3 minutes of breathing with him like this, and go retest his shoulder range overhead, he'd be like, shit, how's that got? It's almost like, it feels a bit like voodoo, but it's like, it's not, but it can feel a bit like that. But for someone like you've described that, for sure. It's simple stuff, but it's just like getting stuff aligned right, getting a bit of work on the nervous system, and actually getting the diaphragm and the ribs. And what does it feel like to actually get your low rib cage to expand 3-dimensionally and that diaphragm to actually move correctly? We don't know what that is. We don't know what that, because it's very internal. It's not an external sensation like tensing your bicep or tensing your abs. Like, it's not it's not on the outside. It's deep inside. So we have to get it's a little bit more delicate, a little bit more intricate with our interoception, our awareness of what's going on the inside, which is good. It's a good thing for us, but it's difficult at the start.
Yeah. So this whole time we've been talking about nasal breathing, and I think it's what I first go to is, well, I'm going to get a complaint. Well, I can't nasal breathe. I can't nasal breathe. My nose is clogged. Take out a deviated septum. How can we make sure that someone can breathe more clearly through their nose? And if they don't have that, what are some steps that you would have them do to, fix that?
Yeah. It's a use it or lose it organ. So like the more we can use it, the more it will stay clear. If we've been sort of mouth breathing for quite a while, it can become very clogged, like mine was at the start. An interesting breath holding, and there can be very gentle and simple ones, and we can do one now as an example where we just allow that nitric oxide, which is a gas made in the nasal cavity, that is vasodilating. It also does a load of wonderful things for like the protection. It's where your immune system starts. Like the outside world. If you keep your mouth closed, the outside world comes in through your nose, and the nose and the airway and the passages back there is all part of the first stage of your like protection and your immune system. So this nitric oxide is antiviral, antifungal, but also vasodilating. So it has this effect of like opening up the capillaries in your nose, so it can actually feel clearer. So I can imagine, if you imagine sort of you do it with me now, but also people listening along at home, if you take a breath in through your nose to get a gauge of like do quite a strong one, how blocked does it feel? And then just test one compared to the other. Actually, it's not uncommon for one to be more blocked than the other, but we can tend to clear them both up. And we're going to take a normal breath in and out, and then we'll pinch our nose at the end of the exhale and nod the head like 10 times. Or you can go side to side, but like 10. And then you let go and you breathe in. And you might notice that the nose feels a little bit clearer. And 10 is just a small number. We just start easily. But it can feel, it's a difference. Like I can notice a difference in mine. You tend to do...
Left. Yeah, the left felt a little bit easier.
Yeah. And, you can do some slightly stronger ones gradually. And if you do breath holding as part of your warm-ups that we sort of do with athletes and stuff, and you can do some stronger breath holds for improving things like lactate tolerance and that side of things. You do some like more aggressive breath holds that, aren't suitable for people of ill health or heart conditions, or if you're pregnant, they're not appropriate. But for people that are fit, well, and healthy, looking to like make some performance improvements, like stronger breath holds really really help to clear and open it up. And then it's a case of like when it's open, retrain those habits. Like when you're consciously aware, be consciously aware, like catch yourself when your mouth is open, and get yourself breathing through the nose. And I think two things that I always say that's helpful for this is not just breathe through the nose. One thing is breathe into the face rather than up the nose. If you breathe up the nose, we lift the chest. Yeah. Mm. If we breathe into the face, got my little, let's call him Dave. This is Dave, the only one that's watching on the video. So breathe into the face because air doesn't go up. Air goes back and down. But when you do, imagine yourself breathing backwards and try and feel. It's a bit of mindfulness exercise. Feel the air in here going towards the back of the throat, and you'll find that rather than lifting the chest, you'll feel like I'm expanding lower down here. It helps, literally helps with the mechanics. And the final thing, okay, we can use Dave again, tongue to the roof of the mouth. If you've got your tongue to the roof of the mouth, it'll encourage you to have your mouth closed. It's very unlikely you'll have your tongue to the roof of the mouth. It's uncomfortable to have the tongue. And even if you put your tongue to the roof of the mouth and seal it, create a little bit of suction, like fully seal your tongue to the roof of the mouth, and then pinch your nose and try to breathe in through your mouth.
Oh, you can't. Wow.
Yeah. So because it blocks the airway. Yeah. But the tongue should be at the roof of the mouth. Having a couple of things to mindfully focus on: tongue to the roof of the mouth, breathing into the face rather than up the nose, will keep your mouth closed and keep you more likely to nasally breathe. And actually, give you a bit of mindfulness practice without even trying to sit there and meditate, you'll probably get some calmness through your mind at the same time. I mean, that's a whole another probably episode of talking about how it can influence mindfulness and the benefits of that for flow state and things. But a bit of conscious awareness, not being obsessive, but a bit of conscious awareness goes a long way.
Yeah. So you brought up the fact that the more you utilize your nose, the more that it'll actually be easier to breathe through. I start to think of like a pull-up, and we'll see if this is wrong or right. But if I were to try to get someone strong in a pull-up, you couldn't get your first pull-up. I'd rather have you work the eccentric. Let's do the negative. Let's get you to jump up. I would prefer you not to use a band because you're not really getting any real stimulus to the muscles. Is it kind of the same with breathing, to where is it bad to use a nose dilator? Is that cheating, or is that kind of an easy way to start work? No,
it's a good question. Like, so if someone's really struggling, like I've got some here. Look, I've got all the props today. Like the little breathe right strips to go across the nose. They can help a little bit if people are really struggling. The nasal dilators go on the inside and push it out. They can be really helpful for people, particularly if you struggle with nasal breathing during exercise, and it's appropriate for you to be able to wear something like that, depending on your exercise or sport that you're doing. Using a nasal dilator at night, when people find it really struggling at night, it's it's definitely not cheating. But I think I know the sentiment that you're sort of saying. Like, if I start using a nasal dilator, am I going to be reliant on this nasal dilator for the rest of my life? Is a really good question. I think that for a lot of people, for some people, it will be useful for them to help make nasal breathing more normal and natural for them, so that then gradually they don't rely on it. I think would be a nice place to get to with these things. But the shape of your nose, the size of your airway, the size of the nostrils, they all play into how easy or not it's going to be for your nasal breathing. The shape of your jaw and the width of your palate dictates how wide that airway is as well.
Yeah, because that's, I guess, again, if you're looking at like strength training, you can utilize a band to get a pull-up. It'll just, in my mind, and what I've kind of learned and built on, is it'll take you longer, but you'll still get a pull-up by utilizing a band underneath your feet to help you up. But like, could it be done more efficiently by utilizing just the eccentric instead of using a band to kind of help you through the whole thing? But it sounds like maybe just to get into nasal breathing to maybe where you're more comfortable to do it, that actually might be a good first step.
Yeah, it's the same as what I said before, of like nothing in isolation. It depends. It depends on the person, the context, and what we're trying to do. And the same with your pull-up is a good example of like, well, someone might need to use a band to even do the eccentric, as an example, like where. So it just, for me, nothing, very rarely in life is something black and white, and it always comes down to, it depends. What does this person need in this situation, and it's always contextual.
Yeah. The other piece there that I've got from, once again, I'll bring it up, James Nestor, and then you really quickly just brought it up there, but is by putting the tongue on the top of the roof of your mouth, we're actually actively working on widening the jaw, right? It's kind of like mewing, and that kind of plays into your breathing. Could you kind of expand on that? Do you tell people to kind of work on mewing and like really making sure that they're trying to widen their mouth?
I don't know. Very rarely. There's like one exercise I like to give some people if they need it. That's basically just like a hard mewing exercise. There is people out there that specialize in that. Eric from Flow Ops is amazing at that. We've done a course together. He does a lot of that stuff and I've learned a lot from him on that. And so I would sort of, if someone needed to go down that route, I'd direct them into someone in that more in that area, like Eric. I know James Nestor talks about, he's I'm sure he does mention in his book, but he's talked about it in interviews about like he's used a retainer and actually widened like his palate so much that people can see that he literally looks different. And it's like, you know, the tongue is not going to provide the same pressure that wearing a retainer is going to do. But you can, even if you like, do this now. Yeah, we'll do it. So, you know, we did that suction to the roof of the mouth. All right. Have the tongue in that position, but rather than sucking it, try and push the whole of the tongue up. Push it up here, and even try and even get the back of it pushing up, and feeling like as you're pushing it up, it's literally spreading that palate. And you'll feel, if you push hard, you'll feel muscles around your jaw, around your neck.
Yeah, here.
Kicking in. So push as hard as you can for 5 seconds. Hard. 5, 4, 3. Hard as you can. 2. Spread the palate. 1. Okay, relax. Now breathe into the face through your nose. And I bet it feels easier to breathe through. It's just, I don't.
Substantially.
Yeah. And I'm not. The question that I can't answer is, I don't know if like, you just did that for 5 seconds. Has that actually physically widened the palate or not? I don't know. Does it make a real tangible difference in sensation and clearness of the nose? Yes. Exactly what's happening with that? Not, but we know that it works. So, you know, doing some 5-second isometrics can really help people, and building up the strength of the tongue to be able to like comfortably sit relaxed and rested up there is definitely helpful for a lot of people, particularly if they've been mouth breathers. But it's not something that I get everyone to do. It depends on, again, context, depends on the person, what they need.
Yeah. Just to wrap this up, I do want to go back because we made a kind of big circle, but I do want to run back to the nighttime piece of this, the sleeping piece. What do you recommend people, like if they recognize, hey, I do wake up feeling kind of bad. And I know you brought up a lot of pieces, but what would be some things you'd recommend? Would you recommend the mouth tape? Would you recommend the nose dilator? What would be some like little tips that you'd recommend to where they can sleep more effectively and efficiently?
No, thank you. Great question. I'm just going to grab a little exemplar. It's a great question, and allows me to also highlight a very, very important point, that social media is great for things. Look, we're only having this conversation because we connected on Instagram, right? So, and I'm not against it, but it, I use it, but it does encourage, highlights and short, snappy things, and someone doing something with tape on the mouth like looks, you don't get the full story. It's why podcast is great, because we get to be able to answer like the full story. So putting tape on your mouth is solving short term the problem of your mouth being open and you snoring through your mouth and dehydrating and being bad breathing when you're sleeping. But it's not the solution to your problem. It's just a band-aid over the crack, literally. Yeah. Like what we need to do is we need to work on our breathing. We need to assess our breathing, be aware of our breathing, work on our breathing consciously when we're awake, so we can change the unconscious habits when we're asleep. Part of the process may be, for individuals, taping the mouth so that it stays closed. But ultimately, can we get to the point where we don't need it anymore? Maybe. What else goes into play? There's a few things in life that will always happen. 1, you'll be born. 2, you will die. 3, gravity will only ever go one direction. You know that in diving, for example. Yeah. And gravity, when you're lying in bed on your back, gravity is going to pull your jaw open. So lying on my side, I can negate some of it. Lying on my front, I can negate some of that, like jaw just dropping open because of gravity. Working on calming your nervous system so you're not in a rush to breathe as fast means that your brain will be happier when you're asleep, breathing through your nose, which naturally slows down your breathing. But if your brain on auto isn't comfortable breathing slowly, it won't want you to breathe through your nose, and it will make your mouth come open. So I can't emphasize sort of that enough. The other thing is the myotape is the tape that goes. For a lot of people, they find it a bit stressful to have tape on their lips, like directly on their lips. I personally put 3M markable tape directly on my lips, but for a lot of people, they find it a bit stressful. So this stuff, it's like the stretchy physio tape that you stretch it and put it around the lips. Because you put it on with it stretched, when you're relaxed, it just it just encourages the mouth to be closed. And then if you need to breathe through the mouth, you can. If you need to have a drink, you can. But it keeps the mouth closed, even if you were lying on your back. And, the other thing for people, if they are going to try something like this, is it's totally safe to do. And if you're someone that's suffering with like sleep apnea or you use a sleep app machine, like you need to consult your doctor and follow medical advice. But if you're someone that's just like, okay, I wake up with it, I don't feel like my sleep's great. I wake up a few times in the night. I wake up with a dry mouth. I think I'm mouth breathing at night. My partner tells me I'm snoring. Like trying to work on your breathing during the day. Yes. Put a little bit of tape, use a little bit of tape in the evening before you go to bed and do a down regulation breathing practice so that you're used to having some tape on your mouth whilst you're awake in the evening. You've down regulated the nervous system, calmed your breathing. Then, either brush your teeth and then re-put some new tape on, or, maybe you've done all your ablutions already and you can just go then straight to bed. And, one of two things will happen. I get some people that will send me a message having mouth tape for the first time. They're like, oh, wow, I had such an amazing night's sleep. I can't believe it. And I'm like, good on you. Good for you. I was like, do you want to know what happened to me? I woke up and the tape was on my head. And then the next night it was on my neck. And then the next night it was over here. And my brain was not happy keeping my mouth closed. And that's a problem. Like, we all think we're asleep. I played rugby, right? And the bigger your neck circumference, the more likely you are to have problems snoring and sleep apnea and things like that. Now, when you play a sport like rugby and away games, you share a room with someone. And we all think when we're asleep, it's like, I'm so calm, I'm sleeping, and it's just nice. Whereas actually what's happening is, it's like, does that sound at all calming for your body, let alone the nervous system? It's like, no, of course it's not. Like, you don't need to go to Stanford University to work out that that's not good for your sleep. You need to calming our breathing is going to be really important for our sleep, for sure. But take those sort of steps to make sure that it's you feel calm whilst you're doing it. But yeah, for me, my brain did not want to keep that mouth closed. That's the problem. Why won't it? Because there's some things that need to be addressed on the auto side of things when you're not awake. And the great thing with the breath is you've got that auto setting, so we don't have to think about it, but then you can choose consciously to do something about it to change that auto.
Yeah. Well, it was an honor having you on. I know a bunch of people would be able to get a lot out of this podcast, so I'm excited to share it. But thank you for your time. I know at some point, I'm going to have to rip you back onto this podcast at some point to keep going over this. But
mate, for sure, I'd love to.
It was an honor having you on.
No, I'd love to, and all the best for your endeavours towards Paris. There are plans to come to the States. I was in Canada earlier this year. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Indiana.
Okay. There is plans to get over the water from the UK, and we will definitely, maybe we could do the next podcast in person.
Yes,
that'd be cool.
Well, yeah. Thank you for your time, and I can't wait to connect again.
Cheers. Thanks, pal.
Thanks.